Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I feel like I was just saying this in one of my most recent videos, but once again, it has been like 2 or 3 weeks since I have filmed a video. I have just not been having a great time in life, so any motivation that I may have at once had to film is just gone at this point, so I just haven't been doing it, and frankly I haven't been doing a whole lot of reading either. But today I did get a little bit of motivation, a little inkling to film my February wrap-up, so that is what I'm going to be doing today. I actually really hate the lighting in this video right now, but I don't know how to fix it, so we're just gonna deal with it. But like the way that the light is like dark on my dolls and stuff like that, I just feel like it looks awful, so I'm sorry about that, but this is the only time of day that I really had to film, so we're just gonna roll with it and hopefully it doesn't bother you too much. Also, just to give you an idea of how my life is going and how I feel about it right now. Usually when I film videos, I am wearing like normal people clothes up here and then pajamas on the part of my body that you can't see. But today, I could probably go the whole video without telling you this, but I'm wearing a nightgown. So we're just gonna go with it. These are jammies, they're from Walmart, I love them, Nightmare Before Christmas, I matched my earrings to them, and I hope you appreciate my effort. So without further ado, let's jump into my February wrap-up. I read 4 books in February, which is the same amount of books that I read in January, and similarly to January as well, I did not super love all of the books that I read. In fact, 2 of the books were actually rereads for me, and I reread them because obviously I really liked them the first time that I read them, but with both books I actually didn't love them quite as much reading them again this time, and I'm really beginning to wonder if it's actually the book's fault, like if I'm not enjoying these books genuinely because the books aren't that good or they're not good for me, or if it's just because of the way life has been going and like my outlook in life is just not great right now and it's affecting my enjoyment of books. I genuinely don't know, and it's starting to concern me, but yeah, I'm just gonna warn you in advance that this is not going to be like a super positive wrap-up because I just didn't super enjoy a lot of the books that I read. So we're actually going to get started with the books that I reread because I don't have a whole lot of things to say about them because I've already spoken about them on my channel before, so we'll just get them out of the way at the beginning. So the first book that I reread was a collection of poetry by Halsey called I Would Leave Me If I Could. This is actually my 3rd time reading this book. The first time I read the physical copy, the second time I listened to the audiobook, and then this time I listened to the audiobook while following along reading the physical copy of it. And like I said at the beginning, I didn't enjoy this quite as much as the last 2 times that I read it. If you're wondering why I was rereading it for a 3rd time, because y'all know I'm not really a poetry person, but this is very like angsty kind of poetry. Like I said, I don't read poetry, so I don't feel like I can really review it, but from what I've heard from other people that have read this book, it's not like the best poetry, but it's very angsty. It is very lyrical. A lot of the stuff you can tell it could be like a great song of theirs, but I was also feeling very angsty earlier in February, and so I just felt like reading this book again, and it just didn't quite do it for me this 3rd time around, so I probably will not be rereading it again anytime soon, but I still enjoyed reading it. It just wasn't quite as good as it was the last couple of times that I read it, and my cat is playing with my camera lens cover. But yeah, if you are interested in picking this book up, I always say to Google the trigger warnings, or I would even just say if you feel that you need to Google the trigger warnings, you probably should not read this book because it does get very heavy at times. Second book that I reread in February was Through the Woods by Emily Carroll. This is a horror graphic novel. It is actually a collection of 5 short stories. I had read this a couple years ago and I really enjoyed it. It was one of the few graphic novels at the time that I actually did really enjoy because it is very easy to follow and simple to read. There isn't a whole lot of like dialogue or speech bubbles or anything like that. There tended to just be like one narrator, and that was very easy for me to follow as somebody that has a little bit of trouble reading graphic novels. But the illustrations in this are also just absolutely beautiful and terrifying at the same time. My favorite part about this is definitely the illustrations, and like I said at the beginning, again, this book I did not quite enjoy it the second time around as I did the first time, and I do now remember why I gave this book 4 instead of 5 stars, and that is because pretty much every single book in this story has a very open ending, and like some people are totally fine with that. They prefer open endings, they love that stuff, so I would still totally recommend this book, and I still like gave it 4 stars, but I just didn't remember quite how open the endings are, and that is not my preferred way to close a story, so that did bug me a little bit reading it again, because I think I had just kind of forgotten how they ended. So yeah, if you don't super like open endings, just be aware that that is what you're gonna get out of reading this book. But either way, I would still recommend it because I think the artwork is very stunning and also gory at the same time, and I think it's really well done stories, even though the ending isn't like my preferred type of ending. So now moving on to the 2 books that I read for the first time in February. First up, we have From the Dust Returned by Ray Bradbury. This is from the library, so it's got one of those very reflective covers on it, and it's also, I feel like, really messing with the white balance of this video, but again, I don't really know how to fix it, so I'm sorry that the lighting in this video is just absolutely terrible. Honestly, the light that's coming through my window right now is so bright that I genuinely don't know how I'm not squinting, but that's how it feels. Anyways, From the Dust Returned by Ray Bradbury. This is the first time I've ever read a book by this author. I know that he is probably most known for his book Fahrenheit 451, which I've never read and genuinely have no idea what it is about, but I was kind of recommended this book after I heard somebody else talk about it, and they kind of explained it to me as being like an Addams Family / Munsters kind of story, in which we're following just this like supernatural kind of family of all these different kinds of supernatural creatures, but like they're one big family and they live in this creepy house that just like popped up out of nowhere, and that essentially is what this book is about. We're following our main character, who I believe his name is Timothy, and he was just kind of like dropped at the house and they took him in, so he is actually the only like mortal person in the family, like the only human person. Everybody else is like immortal and they have supernatural abilities and stuff like that, or they're just like straight up supernatural creatures. So he is like the only mortal one of the family, and we kind of follow him as he lives his life with this family. I had some very high hopes for this book, being that it was sold to me as like an Addams Family Munsters kind of story, and I absolutely love that concept. Like, I grew up watching those TV shows, so I had kind of high expectations going into this book, and I can definitely see where someone would make that comparison and see those similarities in the story, but for me, this book was just not for me. And I think a lot of it had to do with the writing. I struggled a lot with the writing and the way that the sentences flowed. It was very, like, not flowery, because I don't love flowery writing, but I feel like I can still appreciate the beauty of flowery writing. Like, flowery writing is very beautiful, but it's just a little bit too wordy for me. Whereas with this book, I wouldn't consider it to be flowery writing, but it was very wordy, and I did not love that. Also, it did feel more of a classic than it actually is. I think this book was written in like the early 2000s or something like that, but it felt much older than that, and it could just be because the author is, you know, he is older. But yeah, the writing just definitely didn't work for me. Also, this book, the plot of it was set up in a way where it felt more like a collection of short stories, and we kind of got a bunch of little stories of like how each one of the family members came to live in this house, and it wasn't like a super plot, like beginning, middle, end kind of a book. It was more of like a bunch of short stories that comprised the whole story, and I'm notoriously known to not really enjoy short story collections, so I think that's another thing that kind of hindered my enjoyment of this book. I did end up giving it like 1.5 stars on Goodreads. Genuinely, that's like how I don't usually give out 1-star ratings, because I will usually DNF a book before it gets to that point, but I had such high expectations for this book that I just kept on reading it, hoping that it would get better, and it just never did. But I did give it a little 0.5 extra star because there was a little part at the end of this book that was just like a little nice note that I enjoyed, and I'm not going to tell you what it is because obviously that would be spoiling it, but yeah, I did appreciate that little bit of the story at the end that I can't tell you about. So those are my thoughts on this book. I'm very disappointed that I didn't love it, because genuinely the concept of it sounded right up my alley, but it just didn't work for me. And then the final book I have to talk about in this video is called The Witch of Portobello. This is a book that I picked up on a whim at Barnes & Noble. I had never heard of this book before, and only after picking it up did I realize that it was written by the same author that wrote The Alchemist, which is another book that I haven't read, but I do know is like a very well-beloved book. So I felt pretty safe picking this book up, having never heard of it before. I was also very intrigued by the plot of it as per the back of the book, which really isn't a plot at all. It says, this is a story of a mysterious woman named Athena told by the many who knew her well or hardly at all, and that pretty much sums it up. This book is about the story of this woman's life, and it is told through interviews of people that knew her, and some of these people knew her for years and years and years, and other people only knew her for a very brief period of time, but she had an effect on all of these people, and that is how we're told the story of her life, is through the eyes of all of these different people that knew her. I thought that was a really interesting concept, so I was very excited to pick this book up. Unfortunately, as a whole, this book did not really work for me. I started off really loving this book because the writing is just absolutely beautiful. I mean, for the entirety of the book, right up until the end, I think it has beautiful writing, and I will definitely be picking up other books by this author, especially The Alchemist, because I know a lot of people loved it. But unfortunately, where this book kind of lost me was around the middle part of the book, where it started to get very spiritual. The book as a whole is a very spiritual kind of book, and for some of it I found it to be very interesting. It kind of touched on a couple of different religions, and I kind of liked reading about it and learning about it. As a religious person, there were some parts that were a little bit much for me, but for the most part I found the spiritual aspect of the story to be very interesting to read about. But around the middle part of this book, maybe like 2/3 into it, it started to take a very weird turn, and it's not the kind of weird where it's like this is a thriller or horror book where it's like this is really weird and I love it, or this is really weird, it's like horrifying. It wasn't that kind of weird. It was just straight up like, this is bizarre. I don't know if that makes sense, and I want to be careful with the words that I use because we are talking about, you know, spiritual kind of things, and I don't want to offend anybody, certainly, but I feel like it just took a turn for me that was just a little bit too much, and not in like a good way, weird, too much. Just it wasn't for me. So this book went from being like a 4-star for the first half of it to being a 2-star by the end of it, because it was just a little bit too much for me, and I also can't say that I fully understand what the point of it was. Like, it's one thing for a book to take a turn this way in a very weird direction, but for me to understand why it did that, whereas I don't feel like I fully understood what the point of it was by the end. So yeah, this wasn't really for me, but nonetheless, I did think the writing of it was absolutely beautiful, so I will be picking up more books by this author in the future, probably starting with The Alchemist, or if you have any other recommendations of books by this author that you would recommend, let me know. So those are the 4 books that I read in February. I feel like this video was not enjoyable to watch in the slightest, both because I wasn't super into any of the books that I read this month, and also because this was just all over the place. Pretty much every other book I talked about, I had to jump up and run into the other room because I heard my cats doing something stupid in the kitchen. So I am just scattered all over the place as far as my brain and my thoughts. But I hope in editing this video I can cut together something that makes a little bit of sense. So yeah, I think I also might have to put like a blooper reel at the end of this because of how much nonsense that is happening with my cats around me. But that brings us to the end of this video. If you guys did by chance enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in my next one. Bye! Please don't pull the curtain down, my dear child cat. Chumper! Chumper, you cannot climb a glass. It's just not plausible. Plausible. Thank you. Guys! Chumper! 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 Chomper! Mind your business.